Here we go again. We are live on the Gettysburg battlefield. It is Gettysburg 161, and we're at a place I'm going to wager that most of y'all have not stood before, okay? We're along the Hanover Road. We're next to Rock Creek off to my left, and we are generally east of Gettysburg on another one of the 10 roads that led into Gettysburg at the time of the battle. I'm Gary Edelman. We got Chris White behind the camera. We're about to have a gaggle of guests as well. But before I do anything else, let me just say that if you have stood here at this feature that we have right behind me, put it in the comments, I've been there, or if you're really snide about it, write it in a way where it sounds like I've been there before, and we're gonna talk about this. This sort of sets up one of Gettysburg's most controversial things, and that has to do with Culp's Hill and Richard Ewell and Stonewall Jackson himself. So let's unpack where we are and some of this stuff with Tim Smith, official historian of Adams County.
So we're standing at the eastern edge of town along the Hanover Road in front of General Richard Stoddard Ewell's headquarters marker. And, you know, I have to mention right away that it says on the marker this was his headquarters on July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd, July 4th, and July 5th. Maybe one of the few monuments in our town that talks about July 5th. Certainly, he was not here on July 5th. And, you know, we're not even sure if this area was his headquarters. This is the John Lutz farm. Behind the monument, the John Lutz house still stands. It was about 7 acres at the time of the battle. It was a brickyard. Now, the monument, the marker, the headquarters marker, there are 14 such markers around the battlefield placed by the War Department. And I think the Union headquarters markers were placed in 1918, 1919, and I think the Southern monuments for the headquarters were placed in April of 1920. And, you know, I've read a lot about Ewell and his whereabouts during the battle. There is no evidence that places him there at that site. And I think we question most of the locations of these headquarters markers around our battlefield. And, you know, it's interesting that the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission put these up. You probably know there were other park commissions at Antietam and Vicksburg and Chickamauga, Chattanooga and Shiloh. And I'm always curious about this because the commissions came up with their own separate rules. And one thing that really bothers me, and I'd like to know if it bothers you guys, is that at Gettysburg, upright cannon barrels mark the location of a general's headquarters. At Antietam, an upside-down cannon barrel marks where a general was killed. At Chickamauga, a stack of cannonballs marks the location of a general's death site. And at Shiloh, a stack of cannonballs is a general's headquarters. You make sense of that.
That sounds good. So first of all, Tim Smith just mentioned 3 non-Gettysburg battlefields, so it's a momentous day to start with too. I thought, Tim, you were going to say a funny about Richard Ewell before we move on to some of our other guests. No, not at this point? Okay, good. Well, we're going to then move on here because Tim's going to give his mic to our guests here. You've seen him already. This is Dane, and this is Mike from the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, and they've got something that concerns the man whose headquarters marker is right here.
Yes, Gary, we have a 4-part general order that was issued by Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell and signed by his Assistant Adjutant General Alexander Sandy Pendleton. And it was written June 22nd, 1863 from Chambersburg. And he mentions that the sale of intoxicated liquors without permission from the Major General is strictly prohibited. Persons having liquors in their possession are required to report to the Provost Marshal, and any violation of that part or failure to comply in the second part of that order would render their property liable to seizure. And part of this order goes into really the conduct that the Army has with civilians in maintaining discipline in their Army. But we'll especially see how that plays out in the Confederate Second Corps here at Gettysburg, because over the course of the day, you have 2 brigades of the Second Corps laying in this area, most especially close to Weinbrenner's Run, you have a brigade of North Carolinians under the command of Isaac Avery, formerly Hoke's Brigade. You also have a brigade of Louisianans under the command of Harry Hayes, and they are laying in the prone position in the sweltering heat, trying to stave off heat exhaustion and heat stroke, and they would drink anything at that moment.
Yeah, even A.P. Hill himself was brought some muddy, nasty water, and they said, "Sorry, General, this is the best I can do." And he said, famously, "That will do very well." And, I'll note that A.P. Hill was often not in the best of health. Now, as we walk here, first of all, I really think that this idea of liquor during a battle has to prove important during so I would encourage any comments as we walk, but I want to kick a hornet's nest here. Most people who start studying Gettysburg tend to realize, oh man, Lee told Ewell to take that hill if practicable. First of all, that's the first time they've heard the word practicable. And they then usually follow the logic of Ewell was an idiot, and if Stonewall Jackson was alive, he would have taken that hill. I think there's a lot more to it. Who wants to raise their hand? I have both mics. Step to the fore. Tim?
Yes. One thing I always like to stress when people ask this, and this is one of the more commonly asked questions of the battle, why didn't General Ewell capture Culp's Hill on the evening of July 1st? And I always bring it back to what Lee says his orders were on the evening of July 1st. It's much, much more complicated than that. I think, and I'm paraphrasing, General Lee asked General Ewell, take the hill occupied by the enemy if practicable, but do not bring on a general engagement until the rest of the divisions of the Army have arrived. And how are you supposed to attack the hill occupied by the enemy and not bring on a general engagement? That's one question. And the other is, clearly, Lee was talking about Cemetery Hill and not Culp's Hill, as most people make you believe. So again, it's just a little more complicated than people make it sound.
Yeah, let me add to it, Tim. I have a mic, thank you. So let me add to it. Number one, Richard Ewell, first battle in command, really major battle. He's done well so far, but he's been out of the Army since the Battle of Groveton in August of 1862. Does well on the march north, and he brings his corps here from 3 different directions on 3 different roads. It's a converging corps coming here onto the battlefield. But there are problems. Number one, Robert Rhodes's division, his largest division, has been played out on July 1st in piecemeal attacks up at Oak Hill and Oak Ridge. Then Jubal Early claims that his men are too worn out to attack. So Jubal Early is going to basically, the very aggressive guys say, not my guys. Then he is going to throw some shade at Edward Allegheny Johnson, whose men are in the railroad cut trying to get here as fast as humanly possible, but are caught in a massive traffic jam. So as they're caught in this traffic jam, Johnson's men aren't in position. Then you have Ewell, who has to listen to Early, who says, I'm not going to attack. Rhodes's men aren't in a position to attack. Then let's add to this problem that extra Billy Smith, the governor-elect of Virginia, says, hey, there's some troops out in this direction. And it turns out to be the 12th Corps, who show up in a timely diversion, according to a 12th Corps commander named Thomas Ruger. And that is going to draw men over into that area. So there are a lot of moving parts. Plus, I know what is behind Cemetery Hill. I know what's behind Cemetery Hill, and Richard Ewell does not, because I've had a long time to look at this battle. He has not. He doesn't know if the entire Union Army is back there. So he is going to make the prudent decision to allow Rhodes and Early to lick their wounds, bring Johnson onto the field, and then eventually push him towards Culp's and Cemetery Hill, which will be too little, too late. Now, for those who say if Stonewall Jackson was here, he would have taken those hills and won the Battle of Gettysburg. Here's the question: what battle does he win? The Battle of Gettysburg would not be the battle we know today. If Stonewall Jackson is here, everything would have had to happen exactly the way it did after Chancellorsville to let everything play out on July 1st, 1863. So let's say all of that happens. We get here to Gettysburg. They have driven away 2 infantry corps. There's still 5 more to deal with, and they might be falling back to that Pipe Creek line. The Battle of Gettysburg is not the ultimate battle of this campaign. It's the penultimate battle of this campaign, and the real Battle of Gettysburg takes place down in Maryland along the Pipe Creek line.
Wow, interesting. You know, Chris brings up a great point. And by the way, that was a thorough coverage of the things surrounding why Ewell might not have attacked on July 1st, some of the things going against it. But this idea that Stonewall Jackson is still in command, but remember, Lee's army wouldn't have been restructured if Stonewall Jackson was still in command. You don't have Ewell, you don't have A.P. Hill, you know, so the assumption that they'd end up fighting for that particular hill, which is finally coming into view, is pretty ridiculous assumption. As a matter of fact, Chris is going to show us off to the far left. There is Culp's Hill. I'm trying to channel some Tim Smith by slowing down my diction of that hill to provide it more respect. Culp's Hill. So that's really good. I would only add one more thing, that Ewell did send some of Johnston's men, Allegheny Johnston's men, up to Culp's Hill. And who did they run into? But men of the 7th Indiana, just arrived men from Cutler's Brigade, the 1st Division of the 1st Corps, who were up there. There were only a few hundred of them, but the Confederates didn't know that in the gathering darkness. So, you know, that's another thing to convince the Confederates not to attack Culp's Hill. But as Tim said, Lee was talking about Cemetery Hill anyway, so it's much more complex than it comes out to be in the Gettysburg movie and in most Gettysburg videos.
And let me add one more thing for all you Richard Ewell haters out there. Where was A.P. Hill? When Ewell is told to attack that hill, A.P. Hill is going to say, my corps is played out, I can't make attacks, because he had led piecemeal attacks on McPherson's Ridge, then Seminary Ridge, that were bloodying Heath's and Pender's divisions, and then only in reserve is Anderson. Hill is not here to support. Longstreet is stuck in a traffic jam along Route 30, and now here's Richard Ewell with 1 division supposed to take on an unknown element of the Union Army. And by the way, there are 40 cannons being placed up there under the watchful eye of Thomas Osborne, Charles Wainwright, and of course, Winfield Scott Hancock has arrived on the field.
Man, you know, thanks so much, Chris. Again, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're on East Middle Street, going west on East Middle Street. We're going to pause up here at this next sign up here. But before we do, thanks so much to Johnny for your generosity, and again to John Eden for unprecedented video generosity. We really appreciate it. Lee McGinnis has hit it right. If Stonewall Jackson was here, he'd have smelled pretty bad because he was dead for a couple of months or close to it by that time. There's Wolf Tracks again, one of our favorite people on here today. And there's just too many comments for me to get to, but here we are arriving at a place that first of all needs some orientation, and that second of all, I know Tim Smith's going to want to talk about. So all these houses were hospitals, and as we're looking, I just want to show you that we're looking at the Henry Culp farm. Beyond that is Culp's Hill, and off, as Chris goes up higher, you're seeing Culp's Hill, but off to the right, you're also getting a view a little bit of some of the distant Cemetery Hill, really behind the school complex you see off to the right here. Now, Tim, there's a lot of Culps here in Gettysburg. I'm understanding we can't get into all 4,684 of them, but tell us what you'd like.
Well, you know, I think people do often get confused with the Culp family. And I think in the census for the town of Gettysburg and Cumberland Township in 1860, there's like 100 people named Culp that lived here. Christoffel Culp actually first settled here, bought this piece of land in 1787.
Let me know it. I'm already worried. You went back to Christoffel Culp?
Yes.
I mean, we're going way back, so settle in, people.
We went back 1,000 Culp.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt here.
So Henry Culp, who owns it at the time of the battle, is the grandson of Christoffel Culp. And they owned about 230 acres of land at the time of the battle, the land that we see out in front of us. And I should mention that the houses behind us along this street, Middle Street, were not here either. And so the main line of the Confederate Army would be along the Hanover Road. And undoubtedly, Gordon's brigade and was back there, who are in reserve on this attack on the evening of July 2nd. But when you talk about the attack on July 1st, like you guys did, and Chris and you both hit on it, Cemetery Hill is not a weak position. There's artillery on that hill, and on the evening of July 1st, the Southern Army would have had to have gathered a force here and then crossed almost a mile of open fields to then charge up a hill with cannons on top of it. and it's not such an easy assignment as people make it out to be. But one interesting thing about the Culp family, Henry Culp's son, Rufus Culp, is in the Northern Army at Gettysburg at the time of the battle. And it's something you don't hear a lot about. His son had joined the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment and then was assigned to the Signal Corps and was on Powers Hill at the time of the battle, directing artillery fire into the Confederate troops crossing his father's property. And of course, their second cousin was Wesley Culp, who was in the 2nd Virginia during that attack, or maybe he's killed prior to the attack. But, you know, he's the famous Confederate soldier.
I think Tim just answered the question a lot of people have. Did they have indirect artillery fire during the Civil War? Here you have signal people helping with the indirect artillery fire. Pretty cool stuff. Now, while we're here, it seems an appropriate time to bring back, for the last time today, our friends at the National Civil War Museum, because they've got an object. It's not from Gettysburg, but it does concern some of the troops around here. We'll bring it all together in short order. But Dane, DeFebo, what do you got?
Well, we have a Catholic prayer book that was found on a Union soldier a year before the fighting here at Gettysburg, July 1st, 1862 at Malvern Hill by a 2nd Lieutenant Thomas E. Kelly of Company F of the 5th Louisiana. Now that regiment was on the right flank of Harry Hayes's Louisianans as they aligned here to approach and to make their assault on East Cemetery Hill. The book was taken from the Federal soldier's body and was presented by a Reverend Father Robinson, Confederate States of America. And you can see there's a split that goes right down the pages in that book, as if it was almost struck by a projectile or has some serious damage to it.
Good, good. Now note, the connections here is, of course, that there is Louisianians fighting in this vicinity, advancing on East Cemetery Hill, and also that we are just one day past Battle of Malvern Hill 162. So we don't want to let a good object go to waste when you've already brought it to town. So guys, we really appreciate all you've been doing these last 2 days. Everybody, we'd love to hear from you if you've enjoyed seeing their objects on this live feed. And we hope you'll check out the National Civil War Museum. Well, when you're in Gettysburg, just head up to Harrisburg. It's less than an hour. And I think you're going to be happy with what you see. Again, as I've said a few times, north, south, black, white, east, west, trans-Mississippi. They really cover it all well. So thanks so much for joining, guys. Hand your mic off, and we're going to leave you in the dust. All right, now you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're making our way toward, but not all the way to, East Cemetery Hill. Tim Smith, do you want to sort of set up this attack? Or no, Sarah was going to do this. I'm going to hand my mic. Oh, he's going to hand his mic over. Tell us what's going on July 1st or 2nd or 3rd, whatever you'd like to do.
All right, so what I'd like to do is kind of orient where we're at, what's going on here on what is the Union's right flank. Because if you've caught some of our other videos talking about the fighting on July 1st, 1863, the fighting happening on the Union left, down on Little Round Top, Wheat Field, Peach Orchard, that's also happening on July 2nd. Now we've layered in quite a few stories here, quite a bit of information for you. So the controversial, if practicable, that happens on the evening of July 1st. So you've got Confederates coming into this area after they've smashed through the 11th Corps, and they're coming in, taking up their new positions that they'll be jockeying through during the rest of the battle. Now out here on July 2nd, second day of the battle, you have the Confederates lining up. Are they going to launch an attack onto the high ground of East Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill? The answer is yes, but it's going to be later in the day. Now, there's lots of things happening. If you caught our last live video, you heard Chris and Doug talking about how Union troops are being shuffled. They're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you will. So they're shifting Union troops that could be part of the defense of this area or the Union line on Cemetery Ridge, and sending them in to areas like the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, helping to defend parts of Cemetery Ridge. Then the Confederate attacks are going to go toward this high ground that we're looking toward. Again, Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. So there's the challenge of how do these attacks unfold? We'll get into that in more detail as we continue our walk. But the fighting here in this area isn't going to come to a stop on July 2nd. There's going to be an attack on Culp's Hill on the morning of July 3rd. And I know it's easy to think about July 3rd, oh, that quiet morning, and then the big artillery and what we sometimes call Pickett's charge or Pickett Pettigrew Trimble's charge. But there's actually some really ferocious fighting that takes place on Culp's Hill on the morning of July 3rd. So this is a continuation of the attacks on the Union flanks by Confederate infantry. Who's up next?
Let's give it to Tim, but I have some stuff to say in the meantime. Thanks to everybody for watching. I'll bet you haven't been down these places. We're on an alley behind and paralleling to the south, Middle Street, East Middle Street, and we're going to turn left up here on East Confederate Avenue. I see so many familiar faces that keep coming on. We appreciate the work, the words, and we like that you're enjoying the artifacts that the National Civil War Museum was able to bring so far. I see a few questions we'll try to get to, but I want to waste no more time. I want to get into some of this fighting here, because remember, on July 2nd, as Sarah was outlining, you got all this fighting going on at famous places, now famous places, Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the Wheat Field, Peach Orchard, Cemetery Ridge, but then there's a gap, and then there's going to be fighting to our right and front, and that is East Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill, and the fighting to the right is really going to be done by Jubal Early's division, 2 brigades. Tim?
On our right would be on the property that is now the junior high school. This would be Harry Hayes's Louisiana Brigade, and directly here where we are, this would be the area which Isaac Avery commanded a North Carolina brigade. And of course, you know, this was Hoke's brigade, and Isaac Avery commanded it here. And according to, you know, Jubal Early, this attack, they got into position on July 2nd. We're crossing over a stream that is known as Culp Run. It runs into Rock Creek. Closer to town, we refer to it as Winebrenner's Run. And this actually starts from a bunch of springs on the other side of Baltimore Street, leading up to the rear of the Dobbin House. So if you go to the Dobbin House and eat dinner, there's a spring in the tavern, and that's part of the springs that feed this run all across that area. And it would be in this gully along this run in which Isaac Avery's brigade was positioned on July 2nd, early in the day. And they stayed here until about 8 p.m. According to Jubal Early or Harry Hayes's account, about 8 p.m. this unit started in their attack on East Cemetery Hill. And one of the things that's interesting about that is there's no daylight savings time in 1863. So imagine in the summer, like 9 p.m., they're heading off in the attack. And 2 brigades will head you know, up Cemetery Hill and swing around onto what we call East Cemetery Hill and attack the northern position. And it's dark. They gain a lot of traction. They temporarily break through the lines up here on Cemetery Hill before Union reinforcements are sent from Cemetery Hill and from the area of the cemetery and from West Cemetery Hill, and these units are driven back. One of the odd things that I think we have trouble figuring out is why Gordon's brigade was not closer in support. So John B. Gordon, who's back on Hanover Street, is supposed to start off at the same time and be sort of a second wave of this attack on Cemetery Hill. And the Louisiana Tigers and the North Carolina Tar Heels do have success in this attack, but Gordon fails to support them. And, you know, when you read about the Civil War, things like this kind of bother me sometimes, where people who are favorites of the division commanders kind of get a pass for not, you know, for inactivity. And we mentioned earlier that Robert Rhodes is supposed to be attacking West Cemetery Hill the same time this attack occurs, and for various reasons decides to call off the attack. Yeah. So this is a critical moment in the battle for me.
Yeah, Tim, one of the things I think, this is Chris from behind the camera, is that John Brown Gordon at the last battle at 2nd Fredericksburg during the Chancellorsville campaign, one of his jobs was to babysit extra Billy Smith throughout most of the battle, who is the governor-elect of Virginia. He's in charge of Jubal Early's old brigade, and it's clear that Early doesn't like having the governor-elect in his division, nor does he trust him in charge of a brigade of men. And he seems to be doing that same thing here at the Battle of Gettysburg, where he kind of attaches Gordon to Smith. So I think that's part of what's going on here. But I absolutely agree with you, Tim, that some of the favorites don't always get called out. Poor Richard Ewell is always getting the short end of the stick, but A.P. Hill, who made just as many, if not more, mistakes here at this battle, never gets called out.
Man, maybe he's a more likable dude. Sometimes it can be that simple. Let me just say, man, we have so many people watching and there's too many more comments to keep up with, but I just wanted to note how nice this is. You mentioned the Hanover Road where John B. Gordon's brigade is located. Look how peaceful this is. Now that we're on preserved land, now that we're on the battlefield, every truck in Pennsylvania is no longer passing by us. So we appreciate y'all getting through that as East Cemetery Hill is about to burst onto our view in part on our right, and Culp Hill still sits in front of us, and we have to set up one of the most dramatic events of the battle, as well as a personal story about a particular commander. By the way, who Isaac Avery, if you ever see a picture of him, did you have a picture in there of Isaac Avery by chance, Chris?
No, I can't.
Okay, well, trust me, his face in the one picture we have is this. Like, that dude looks like he is ready for a fight whenever he took that particular picture. Chris, do you have something?
Yeah, speaking of roads, Gary has tried to get us killed 3 separate times today, and only once on this one where we walked into traffic.
I'm from Chicago, and it is that woman's problem in the minivan that she didn't slow down. She was going 40 in a 25, and we lived, so I think it's okay.
Sarah lived because she was the one in the line of the path. So.
I want to note, too, that I already forgot your name, but somebody made their first comment ever. They're a trust member, and it's their first comment ever. So whoever you are, welcome. We're happy to have you engaging with us on a battlefield where you have helped the American Battlefield Trust to preserve more than 1,000 acres of land here and also at neighboring Fairfield, Pennsylvania. Sarah?
As we're leaving behind Hayes's position, looking across fields that they attack as they head toward East Cemetery Hill, and that very brief breakthrough that they have, I just wanted to tie it back. The 5th Louisiana Regiment is one of the units in Hayes's brigade, so that prayer book that we saw from the National Civil War Museum, that would have been carried by a soldier in that regiment. Was he here at this battle? Sounds like we're not exactly sure, but tying it into those personal stories can be really special along the way. It looks like we're coming up to our next stop and probably some new views of things that we'd like to show you.
Good. So this is, I think, to most battlefield guides, they're going to go ahead and consider this one of their favorite markers on the battlefield because it helps with interpretation. You can do it from the car, easily showing in the actual orientation the Union fishhook as it's supposed to be and the length of the Confederate line that mimicked the Union fishhook and where we are. This is the old style, super effective sign that actually helps battlefield guides and visitors alike to be able to see easily what is going on here. You can quickly grasp it. As Sarah was talking about, actually, we have Culp's Hill here, East Cemetery Hill here. Tim was talking about Hayes and Avery attacking these East Cemetery Hill. And then, of course, you've got Johnson's men, minus some of their troops, attacking Culp's Hill from this direction. So you can see it so easily in the beautiful, you can't really see it, battlefield ahead of us. And a little bit, we're seeing our first slices of East Cemetery Hill over there. Tim?
Well, you know, one thing I did want to mention about this, and I think one of the reasons that it's so popular for people to pick on General Ewell, saying they should have captured that hill on the evening of the first day, is because everyone in the Southern Army realizes that because they didn't capture on the first day, they're going to have to attack those hills on the 2nd and 3rd day.
And like I said, there were a couple hundred there on the night of July 1st.
That's right.
There's going to be, even when Greene's brigade is there alone, it's still going to be a whole lot more than that.
The other thing I always liked about this plaque is how they conveniently put, you know, the fishhook a little, you know, closer to the Union line here, when in point of fact, the southern line of battle probably started like out here and went down and around and up and over, and it was much more expansive. Where this might be 3.5 miles, this is easily 6 miles.
I take back everything good I said about that sign.
Well, it's fine. I like it though. You can feel it.
Well, I agree with Tim because if you read the post-action reports as well as a lot of the diaries, letters, and all of the newspaper accounts, a lot of the Confederates are going to complain that they are on an exterior line that is going to force them to not be able to communicate with each other. It makes it more difficult to maneuver, and it overextends their lines. Later on, this will be forgotten about with the Longstreet early controversies, bringing Ewell into here, Stewart, and others, and playing the blame game. Anyone but Lee after the war. But Lee has something to do with the defeat here, as does the Union Army under George Gordon Meade. So there are a lot of things going on here at play.
Absolutely. The fish stinks from the head. I firmly believe that. And Robert E. Lee is in charge of this army, and he knew it as well. It is my fault. This is all my fault. Now, I want to get into one thing. You know, the reason that Avery's brigade is swinging this way before going that way is, of course, is that it had to get beyond the attack of Hayes's Louisianians over there. So they are needing to wheel behind Tim Smith over here and then come up that way. That's going to present some problems. A, it's going to take a while. And B, I think you can see some of Stevens Knoll over there, named after the battery commander, under the command of another guy here on the second day, but where they presented their flank to a main battery there that